I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office.
You're about to meet a real American hero, the 41st President of the United States. This is his story, and in a real sense, his gift to a nation and the world.
There's a myth about the Bush family. It was said that we were from the East. My mother was from St. Louis, Missouri, and my dad was from Columbus, Ohio.
George Herbert Walker Bush was born in Milton, Massachusetts, June 12, 1924. The second of 4 brothers and 1 younger sister.
When I was growing up, I guess my dad was the most important role model, and also my mother, different reasons. My father was a respected business leader, eventually a strong, respected political leader because he served in the U.S. Senate for 10 years. But he stood for something, and he believed in giving something back. My mother was somewhat the same and somewhat different. I mean, she was a principled woman, greatly respected. She was a tremendous athlete, as was my dad. And of course, we all love sports in our family.
Even at an early age, George showed signs of leadership. He was elected president of his senior class and captain of his baseball and soccer teams.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
When Pearl Harbor came along, I was determined to go into the service. On my 18th birthday, I signed up for naval aviation. That's the youngest you could do it. You couldn't do it before you were 18. And I was a little bit scared. I was probably the youngest guy on the train that was taking us from Penn Station to Chapel Hill. And my dad put his arm around me and just wished me well. Gave me a certain sense of strength. The actual arrival in the Pacific was kind of a turning point, because we knew that we were going to be doing what so many others were doing and had done, and that is fighting for your country.
Serving aboard the USS San Jacinto, Lieutenant J.G. George Bush flew 58 combat missions. But on September 2nd, 1944, on a bombing run over the island of Chichijima, his plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire. Even with his plane severely damaged, he completed his mission before bailing out. Hours later, he was rescued by the Navy submarine, the USS Finbag. Tragically, his 2 fellow crew members were lost. As the war was drawing to a close, George turned his thoughts to returning home and planning his future.
I was at a dance. It was a Christmas dance, and they exchanged dances between Rye and Greenwich.
Well, I remember going to a kind of a high school dance, and there was this beautiful girl.
And I was dancing with somebody, I don't know who, and George, I've heard, went over to a friend of mine from Rye and said, "Who is that girl? I'd like to dance with her." He introduced us, and the moment the music started, it was a waltz, and George said, "You know, I don't waltz. Do you mind if we sit down and talk?"
I don't know whether it's such a thing as love at first sight, but if so, that was probably what happened. And indeed, in January 1945, we were married. I was still 20 years old, and she was still 19. I knew I wanted to go to college, and I knew I wanted to get out of there fast. I knew I wanted to go get a job.
In just 2.5 years, George Bush pushed through Yale University, working on an economics degree, playing a little baseball, and starting a family.
That's where George W. Bush, we used to call him George or Georgie, really first came into our lives.
Oh, miles and miles of Texas.
On the advice of a family friend, the young Bush family was encouraged to go west, start their own life, and meet a new challenge. So they packed up the red Studebaker and headed to Texas.
It was a total cultural change for us, coming out of the East as we did. But I loved it from the minute we got there. And We've been Texans ever since.
Working first as an oil field supply salesman, then co-founding a small independent oil development company, George Bush was rising to this new challenge. In 1953, he helped co-found the Zapata Petroleum Company, and at the age of 30, became president of its offshore subsidiary. Robin, their second child, was born in December 1949, and Jeb in February of 1953. But only a few weeks after Jeb's birth, the young Bush family received devastating news. Robin had leukemia. She would not make it through the end of the year. Over the next few years, George W. and Jeb would be joined by Neil, Marvin, and Doro. As the Bush family grew, so did his oil company and his fledgling interest in politics.
I think Barbara and I presided over the first Republican primary ever held in Midland, Texas. I think 3 people voted all day long. Barbara and me, 2 of them, and one drunk Democrat that thought he was going to the Democratic precinct where everybody voted in those days. About 1960, I got interested in party politics mainly. Was asked to run the Houston-Harris County party. Had to run for election. And it was an eye-opener. I was trying to run a business too. And that led to my being asked by the party to run for the Senate in 1964, which I did with a spectacular lack of success. And then my interest had been full-blown, so I ran for Congress in '66 and won.
After another unsuccessful bid for the Senate in 1970, President Nixon appointed George Bush ambassador to the United Nations. This was followed by other high-level appointments: chairman of the Republican National Committee, envoy to the People's Republic of China, and as director of the Central Intelligence Agency. In May of 1979, to the surprise of many, George Bush officially announced his candidacy for president. His campaign started well behind the party favorites. In fact, in early polls, he was nothing more than an asterisk, listed near the bottom of the page. But by the end of the campaign, George Bush was the only candidate besides Reagan to bring delegates to the convention.
I had not known Ronald Reagan very well. We ran against each other in '79 and '80. I lost to him in the '80 primaries. He was the nominee of the party. Out of a clear blue sky in Detroit, he called me up and said, "I want you to be vice president." And that started a friendship. I learned a lot about common decency and honor. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and I admired him enormously.
8 years as vice president only intensified George Bush's interest in pursuing the highest office in the land. While the Bush presidency oversaw extraordinary developments in the international arenas, his domestic agenda brought significant and meaningful changes to the American people. Driving his domestic policies was his belief in the principles of protecting and nurturing American families, empowering individuals, not government, to make the important choices in life. The strength of a democracy is in the people and their communities. Facing a Congress controlled by the opposition party, important legislation was nevertheless passed, and long-term gains were effected in the environment.
This year's Clean Air Act is the most significant air pollution.
Energy. Civil rights. Americans with Disabilities Act. Budgets and the economy. The banking industry. Education initiatives. American and international trade.
Tumultuous history-making events took place during my 4 years. I'm not saying we did it, but the Cold War ended. The Soviet Union actually came apart at the seams. The Berlin Wall came down and Germany was unified. We almost signed, we negotiated the North American Free Trade Agreement. And there were big, major things happen. Well, the Gulf War, of course, was a defining moment for our country, and clearly a defining moment in my life. August 2nd, 1990, Saddam Hussein, having lied to the leaders of countries in the region, invaded Kuwait. Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. This was the first war that they watched on television. The day the air war started, there was an amazement across the country as they saw that the smart bombs were indeed smart. When people saw with their own eyes the precision and the skill and the motivation of our forces. Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. It was a wonderfully unifying thing for our country, and it was very emotional as the wounds of Vietnam were healed. I think it did a lot to restore confidence, the confidence of the American people in the military, and to give our nation pride. We were a proud nation. You could just feel the patriotism back for a while.
The prospects for re-election in 1992 were very promising, but as in any contest, the outcome is never certain. Even with all the successes of the previous 4 years, there would be no second term for President George Bush. People wonder whether there's a kind of letdown if you leave the office, particularly if you've lost an election. And the answer is we went back to our community,
Okay, I'm gonna
moved
do an
into a
audio
little
check
house.
real quick with
We
the
see, we never
interactive
felt any
points.
entitlement. We never thought we were anything other than fortunate to be able to serve there for 4 years. So there wasn't any adjustment problem. We opened a little office and had some wonderful
Elizabeth,
people
can you
help
hear me
us
in
and
Melbourne?
started doing
Yes, we can hear you.
charitable things.
Okay.
Can you hear us?
Speaking, pay the
Yes.
rent, you know. And
Okay,
life went
would one
on.
of the students just talk to see if
Life
that's a
did
good...
go on for George and
Go
Barbara.
ahead, just say, just
With
practice.
family and friends, their continued efforts
Loud.
in a variety
Go,
of
go,
public
go,
services,
Adam, go.
Cool question.
and
Just go ahead,
of
just
course,
go.
Just say it.
hobbies.
Hi, my name is Adam.
Well, it was a challenge,
Keep going. Oh,
but it was
hi,
something
my
I
name
always
is Adam.
wanted to do. Jump out of an airplane, perfectly good plane, I might add.
I certainly got a lot of mail saying, don't let him do it. But the truth is he wanted to do it, and he loved it. And as I told him, it was a great way to go, no matter what happened.
One way or another, this will be your last jump. I mean, could have left out one way or the other.
The 41st president has pursued his skydiving interest. In 1997, at the age of 72, on his 75th and 80th birthdays, and most recently, he surprised an audience of thousands who had gathered to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the library and museum.
Do you think parachute jumping is reckless? Is that
No.
what you're saying?
No.
I wondered.
No, parachute jumping is just heaven, though.
Another big event in their lives happened on November 6, 1997, with the dedication and opening of the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum.
I don't know if Lou Gehrig, my great idol, said it first, but I do know that he said it best. Today I feel like the luckiest person in the world. It's been everything I hoped. And a lot of my friends in the East said, why did you put your library at Texas A&M University? Why there? And I tell them, it's the spirit of the place. It's the mood on this campus. It's the Aggie spirit, which maybe a lot of people don't even know what it is of coming out of Yale University, but I love it.
For George and Barbara, family has always been a priority, and each and every summer you'll find generations of the Bush family gathering in Kennebunkport, Maine.
Grandchildren sleep all the time.
And they all bring their friends. I mean, our lunches are like Luby's cafeteria.
Sometimes they bring people we don't even know nobody knows who they are. Who's this guy? Third one down at the table. We never saw him, Gabby. We don't know how he got here.
Continuing the path of public service of their father and grandfather, George W. was elected governor of Texas in 1994. In 1998, Jeb was elected governor of Florida, and George W. won re-election to a second term.
We had a real sort of argument about which flag, Texas or Florida, went in order. And finally they found out protocol-wise that Florida joined the nation before Texas. So to George W.'s horror, he arrived when Jeb was there, and his flag was underneath. American flag first, Florida, and then Texas. He told me, he said, I almost got up in the middle of the night and changed the order. He didn't.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully
I think it was one of the most emotional days in my life. I think probably for Barbara too. And I must confess to a few tears when he actually took the oath of office, came over and hugged his mother and dad. I mean, how close can it be? How grand can life be?
George and Barbara continue to be great examples, inspiring not only their children, but a nation as well.
Be honest, try hard, give the other guy credit, don't talk about yourself all the time, listen,
Set a good example.
work hard, set an example. These are fundamental values that we learned from our own parents, and hopefully most families learn from theirs. Some don't have that luxury of learning from loving, caring mother and father, but we did. And then it's so easily conveyed to the next generation, to our kids. You don't lecture them, you kind of try to live those things. Faith and family and friends is what life's about.
There are many more stories to be discovered about this world leader, war hero, dedicated father, and loving husband. This library and museum is dedicated to the preservation of this important time in American history, the American presidency, and a great American, George Herbert Walker Bush.
Good morning, or as we say at Texas A&M, howdy. Now, let's be honest. You have been an awesome group so far. You've been very quiet. You've been paying attention, which you will need to do a lot of later when we welcome some friends of ours from other parts of the United States to join us in today's program via a special connection. But first, we just need to keep it real for a minute. How many of y'all are really glad you're not in class right now and you're here out of class for all? Everybody good with that? All right. We're going to do a lot of fun things today, and we're going to learn a lot in the process. So there are going to be some times that you can really cheer and be happy about being here. I know you're going to be happy the entire time, but other times we do have to make sure that you're as quiet as possible so everyone on the other end can hear us. Welcome to the 11th Annual Reading Discovery Distance Learning Program and Video Conference here at Texas A&M. This is a program of the Education Department of the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum, which is part of the National Archives and Records Administration. I'll be your moderator today. My name is Mike Wright. I'm the general manager of KBTX TV here in Bryan College Station and KWTX TV in Waco, and it's an honor to be here with you again this year. All right, so we're here today supporting First Lady Barbara Bush's literacy reading program. The program today is going to focus on historic and modern China. We'll be learning about being a diplomat in China, as President Bush was, and how much that both he and Mrs. Bush really enjoyed their time in China, as they made a lot of new friends there, they built a lot of relationships, and the United States relationships with China were much improved because of that. Our new interactive learning game that you will have a chance to know more about and to download is a game app called China Diplomatic Dragon. Please download that at no cost. You'll get information in your schoolrooms in your school classes if you don't remember this right now. But it's ChinaDiplomatDragon.com. It's available at Google Play or in the App Store as well. You can enjoy this free game, compliments of the folks involved in today's program. Now, we do appreciate the help of the program's sponsor. David Jones is the Chief Executive Officer of the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library Foundation. And without support of the foundation and allowing us to be part of this beautiful facility, this would not be happening year after year. David Jones, would you please stand to be recognized at this moment? David, thanks for joining us today. This program is also in collaboration with the National Geographic Society. Emma Carrasco is the Chief Marketing and Engagement Officer and has come all the way here from Washington, D.C. to join us for today's program. Please give a round of applause to Emma Carrasco. Emma, would you please stand? China Diplomat Dragon app developer is David Schaller, the EduWeb principal. He is here as well. David, would you please stand? The app developer right here. We also welcome Dr. Joyce Alexander, who is the College of Education, the Dean of the College of Education and Human Development at Texas A&M University, and also from Texas A&M, Confucius Institute's Director Joe Chow, and from the TAMU Chinese School, Principal Jane Zhou. I'm sorry, it should be Director Joe, and then the Principal Jane Zhou. Please, would you please stand and be recognized at this moment? Very glad that our administrators and teachers from our 2 public school districts are here as well. We appreciate all of you and your dedication to making better the future of America with what you do with these students every day. We'd like to acknowledge several of these. We'll ask them to stand at the exact same time. But first of all, we're going to introduce, and this is where you get to cheer just a little bit, anybody from the College Station ISD in the house over here. Where's College Station? All right. You sound moderately enthusiastic to be part of the College Station ISD. I just have to say, I don't think Dr. Ely's too pleased with that. But we'll go to the Bryan ISD. How many of the Bryan ISD in the house? Everybody here today? There we go. We do thank representatives from both being here today. We'll introduce them and ask that they stand all at the same time. Dr. Clark Ely is with us, the superintendent. Aaron Hogan is coordinator of English language at College Station ISD. Principal Holly Scott and enrichment specialist Nancy Boswell are here. Would you 4 please stand and be recognized at this time from College Station? From the Bryan ISD, Superintendent Dr. Christy Whitbeck, and from Jane Long Intermediate School, the Dean of Instruction is Alma Velez, and Mr. Clinton Run, the 6th grade inquiry program. We thank all of you. Would you please stand and be recognized at this time? The Education Department of the Bush Foundation or Bush Library would like to recognize the Josh Gorbett, the news director, and Kewan Brown, news operations from KBTX, for the live streaming and archiving of this program today. Thank you for your support as well. All right, it is time to move on to the middle of our program, and at this time, some student readers will read some remarks from the diary of George H.W. Bush that he made while he was diplomat in China from 1974 to 1976. The photos that we will see are from the game app China Diplomat Dragon, and again are downloadable Bush Card Awards. First, we have 4 6th grade student readers from Cypress Grove Intermediate with a College Station ISD. They are Iman, Annie, Rachel, and Abigail. Guys, it's all yours.
Hi, my name is Iman. Would you like to be a diplomat? Do you want a job which you can travel around the world? This is a government job to represent and protect the interests of your country. Diplomats may negotiate a treaty, attend a state dinner, or approve travel papers. They have many responsibilities. All countries have jobs as citizens as diplomats. In capitals of countries throughout the world, there are embassies. These are diplomatic headquarters. Many diplomats live in their country's embassy. This is a compound of living and working space. The diplomats need to be familiar with the foreign country's policies, as well as adapt to their culture by learning geography, language, and history.
Hi, my name is Annie. In 1974, the future President George H.W. Bush was sent to China by President Gerald Ford to improve relations with China. There had been no formal relationships for 25 years between the United States and China. Mr. Bush was well qualified for this job. He had already served in public leadership roles, such as ambassador to the United Nations. He became the top American diplomat in China. The Bushes arrived in China in October of 1974. He served as the chief diplomat until January of 1976. Ambassadors represent their country while living in a foreign land or on special assignment. This job requires great diplomacy. Diplomacy is a profession of managing international relations. Mr. Bush was a skilled diplomat with a desire to serve his country by building bridges of friendship to serve his country, to strengthen relationships with other countries.
Hi, my name is Rachel. The day he arrived in China, Mr. Bush began writing a diary about his diplomatic life. He described his arrival in the Chinese capital. Few cars and lots of bicycles were his first impression in 1974. Their dog, C. Fred, arrived tired but in good shape. A morning walk was their normal routine. Fred drew attention because there were not many dogs or cats in China then. Ordering a ping pong table and a couple bicycles were first things the Bushes acquired. They invited others to come play table tennis. Mr. Bush's personal diplomatic style was to meet foreign diplomats both professionally and socially. He wrote, "You can't do this job if you don't like people. The best policy is to show your willingness to go to others, to ask advice, and to be grateful."
Hi, my name is Abby. His China diary reveals that Mr. Bush tried daily to live by making friendships. He purposely met with other foreign diplomats and turned to tennis for more than exercise. He wrote in his diary that sports are great equalizers. If you know people and can relax with people, then maybe you can head off a crisis. His emphasis on personal diplomacy had early origins in his life. Mr. Bush has said he used his mother's advice: be kind, don't be a big shot, listen, don't talk, reach out to people. It has to do with life. Treat people with respect. This is a value of treating people equally and fairly. He says in his diary, people are the same the world over. They are friendly if you are friendly with them.
Nicely done. I'm on Annie, Rachel, and Abigail. Great job on that. And now, next student to speak is named Bowen. He is representing the Texas A&M University Chinese School, who will read in English and then will share with us the same material using Mandarin, a Chinese language. He is in the 5th grade. Bowen, all yours.
My name is Bowen Tian. China is the most populous country and has over 1 billion people. China borders 14 nations in the Pacific Ocean. Most people live in eastern China. Western China is mainly mountains, hills, deserts, and rock soil. Mount Everest, named Mount Zhumulangma by the Chinese, is located in both China and Nepal. The geography, history, and culture influenced their way of life. An early emperor began the Great Wall of China for protection against invasion. The Great Wall of China was constructed over 2,300 years ago. It took over 2,000 years to build. Emperors also built elaborate tombs. The Bushes arrived in 1974, the year the Terracotta Army, a set of 8,000 clay soldiers, was discovered near the city of Xi'an. Now I'll read it in Chinese. 中国是世界上人口最多的国家，有 1.4 亿人。中国和14个国家以及太平洋接壤。中国的大部分人口分布在东部。中国的西部大多是山脉和沙漠。中国的世界最高峰珠穆朗玛山脉就在中国和尼泊尔的交界处，地理、历史和文化影响人们的生活。中国的皇帝们修建了长城来抵御敌人的入侵。长城最早开始建于2300年前，经过了2000多年才修建完成。中国的古帝的皇帝们还修建了自己的雄伟陵墓。布什总统1974年至访问中国，那一年在中国发现了兵马俑，8000多个陶土士兵。Thank you.
Bowen. Bowen in the house. Like any of you knew when he was through, you just start clapping like it's all done. That's what. At this time, Dr. Clark Ely would like to demonstrate his manner by repeating what he said. Clark, come right up. No, I'm kidding. We do thank you for a job well done, Bowen. That's incredible. All right, so we're going to move along now to the 6th grade reading students from Jane Long Intermediate School in Bryan ISD. As they come to the podium, they are Quincy, Samantha, and Macy. All yours.
Hi, I'm Quincy. Culture is the group character of a people defined by language, religion, food, social habits, music, literature, art, and architecture. The Bushes wanted to make friends and appreciate their culture. They took Chinese language lessons. Communication in a foreign country with a different language is always a challenge. There were many interesting sights and activities to see and do. The Chinese celebrate many festivals. The Lunar New Year's Festival lasts 15 days. It is a major celebration honoring their ancestors. Due to the Chinese impact around the world, it is celebrated globally. China has a very rich culture. The Chinese people are known for their calligraphy, artwork, architecture, martial arts, acrobatic dance, and cuisine. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Samantha. China is one of the Asian civilizations that was ruled by imperial dynasties until modern times. While the Bushes were in China, they enjoyed attending to picnics at the Ming Dynasty tombs. These tombs reflect on traditional Chinese culture. The Chinese developed the earliest science, technology, astronomy, and math in the world. Early inventions were the magnetic compass, gunpowder, paper, pudding, tea, silk, calligraphy, and porcelain. Porcelain became so popular it's known everywhere as China. Paper money was invented in China. Its original name was flying money because it was so light it could blow out in one's hand. Kites were invented by Chinese around 2,800 years ago to send messages. Some kites could stay in the sky for days. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Macy. The Chinese people continue to develop new products and modernize China. In 2014, China became the world's largest economy, closely followed by the United States. Modern Chinese products include rice, wheat, potatoes, corn, peanuts, tea, iron, steel, aluminum, petroleum, electronics, shoes, textiles, toys, cement, chemicals, and vehicles. Put together, all of China's railroad tracks could loop around the earth twice. Shanghai in China has always been named Shanghai as Modu. It means modern city. Shanghai has always been a leading modern city in China. The diary of Mr. Bush reflects that his diplomatic lessons from China influenced his foreign policy as president. He continued to focus on the important value of personal diplomacy to strengthen United States relations with other nations. Thank you.
I got to tell you, I have the privilege of standing in front of some audiences from time to time, and I still get a little nervous about it. But Imon, Annie, Rachel, Abigail, Bowen, Quincy, Samantha, and Macy, it takes a lot to do what you just did in front of a crowd this size. Would you agree? Kind of a little nervous thing, but you guys sounded really good and did a great job. Thank you so much for everything. It's also interesting to know how the Bushes enjoyed their time in China in the 70s, and indeed Mrs. Bush has always said that China is one of her favorite places to live. We are honored to have Tom Putnam, the National Archives Special Assistant of the Presidential Libraries, with us today. He's come from Boston, Massachusetts, and served as the 5th director of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. Mr. Putnam will now give us some insights about diplomatic gifts received by the President and Mrs. Bush from China. These gifts are part of the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum collection. Mr. Putnam? Thank you so
I agree with Mike, and let's give those students one more big round of applause for just really an incredible job. So I'm very honored to be here with all of you today. I'm a former teacher myself, and I just want you to know I am really heartened to look out at this sea of diverse faces. I think you represent the future of our country, and again, the diversity that we have here in the United States is perhaps one of the greatest strengths of our nation and our democracy. So thank you for having me be part of the program. And I wanted to reiterate something that Mike said, which in the video we saw Mrs. Bush a couple of times sitting in a chair like this and reading stories. Oftentimes the First Lady of the United States picks a signature issue that he or she cares about. And in Mrs. Bush's case, it was literacy. And she wanted all of you to be great readers. She wanted you to read with your families, and she wanted to be sure that every citizen in every country had the ability to read. And so when we gather here today, we're honoring her legacy, and she was really the founder of this wonderful reading discovery program. So as Mike said, I'm here to represent the National Archives and the Presidential Libraries, and I just want to give you a little context about what these institutions are all about. So it was Franklin Roosevelt who decided to build the first presidential library while he was president, and he was in the White House. And when you're president, there are a lot of papers that go across your desk, and you receive a lot of gifts, as we're going to see some that President Bush received. And President Roosevelt thought that those should belong to the American people. So he built a library right next to his boyhood home in Hyde Park, New York, and he donated the building and all of his materials to the National Archives, so that the American people would own and have access to all of those materials. Now, what's the National Archives? Well, an archives is, and the library next door is one, is where we contain all the important papers that belong to our history. So if you ever go down to Washington, D.C., and I'm sure some of you maybe already have, and you might visit the White House or the Lincoln Memorial, but also nearby is this beautiful building called the National Archives, and housed there are some of the most important documents in our history, like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And that's what the National Archives does. It holds those papers so the citizens of our democracy can have access to them. And that's the same thing that presidential libraries do. They hold the papers and materials of a certain president. So George Bush decided to build his library here on this beautiful Texas A&M campus. Texas was his home. He now lives in Houston, but he comes here often. And these are where all of his special materials and some of the gifts that I'm going to show you are held. Let me just reiterate a couple of things that the students said by way of background. First, it really is very interesting that President Bush often talks about the time when he was your age as really being the pivotal moment in his life where he learned some of the most important attributes about how to be a good person and then how to be a good leader. He talked about that in the video that we saw. And one of those was he was a very empathetic person. And when he was your age, he had a nickname. One of his nicknames was Have Half. And that's because if he had a sandwich or a treat and one of his friends was nearby, he would say, do you want to have half? And he wanted to share his whatever he was eating with other people. And that type of empathy, the types of friendships that he developed as someone your age, and then later in all of the various leadership roles that he played, are oftentimes what historians say made him a special person and a special leader. And as you know, when you have a friend, one of the things that friends do is give one another gifts. And when you give someone a gift, first you think, well, what would that person like? So if it's one of your friend's birthdays or if you're giving a gift to someone in your family for a holiday. But you might also try to think, but what would be special for me to give to that person? And in China, giving gifts is also a very, very important part of the Chinese culture. It's sometimes even a bit more formal than it is here, the way we give gifts. And so President and Mrs. Bush, when they were in China, received a number of very special gifts. And what I'd like to do now is show you just 8 of them that were chosen by the staff here at the Presidential Library. And they're housed in, again, this Presidential Center. Sometimes they're put out. There's a beautiful vase that's on display in the museum that was a gift from China. But I'm going to show you now 8 items so we could start the PowerPoint. So the first item is, there it is, great. It's this beautiful, it's a wood block print of a horse. It was given to President Bush. What's special about this was it was actually given to him by his staff. So when he was living in China, there was staff who worked in his office or who in the home that he and Mrs. Bush lived in. And one thing that's interesting is he had a driver, and the driver was, available to him to drive him anywhere he wanted. But as you saw in the movie, he and Mrs. Bush actually chose to ride bicycles as much as they could because that's what most Chinese people did. And they didn't want to appear formal or stuffy. They wanted to be as much like the Chinese as they could. And they really endeared themselves to the Chinese people and especially to the staff who worked for them. So when he left, this was the gift that the staff gave, and they've signed their names along the side of it. The next item is was given by the Chinese government, and you can see there are panda bears and bamboo. Now, the giant panda is native to China, and it's become somewhat the Chinese national emblem. And in 1972, President Nixon was the first American president to visit China, and after that trip, the Chinese government gave a couple of panda bears to the American people out of appreciation. And to this day, they're not the same ones because that happened in 1972, but there are still panda bears at the National Zoo. So if you ever go to Washington, D.C., one of the most popular exhibits at the zoo is to see these giant pandas. And you can go online. There's even a panda cam. And so if you wanted to in your classrooms later, you could see what the pandas are doing in Washington, D.C. The next gift is a painting of a lion. The artist said that this lion was a representation of great courage and gave it to President and Mrs. Bush as a way of giving their best wishes. The next piece is quite fascinating because to me it looks like a photograph. And it's of 2 people, so obviously that's George Bush on the left and then the leader of China, Deng Xiaoping, when President Bush was our diplomat, our highest diplomat in China, and Deng Xiaoping was also very influential when President Bush was president. And what's special about this is they developed this friendship when President and Mrs. Bush were living in China, and then later, obviously the important role that diplomats play is to try to forge friendships and strong relationships between countries. But, friends, often you can have disagreements. And there were some times where there was some tension between the United States and China. And the fact that these 2 men had this personal friendship. And at one point, President Bush actually wrote almost a secret letter right to Deng Xiaoping to try to improve our relations at a critical moment in United States-Chinese relations. But the one interesting thing about this is it's actually not a photo, it's a rug. It's a tapestry that's woven. I don't know if you can tell from the image, but and it was woven by the Red Star Weaving Factory in Shanghai. So the next slide actually was given by the mayor of Shanghai, and one of our students mentioned that Shanghai is a major metropolitan city in China. And but you can see actually it's a colorful painting and more of the kind of a folk art of the countryside. And as you can imagine, China is a vast country, so it has a variety of cities and small towns, and so this is kind of a lovely depiction of kind of a countryside scene. The next gift is a gift of silk embroidery. It's a bright white cat, and you can see again, that's silk, so that's all woven, and then in this lovely, beautiful frame. The next gift is a ceramic and bronze sculpture of the Emperor's Chariot, and I like actually how it's presented here. I'm not sure if that's maybe the way that it was presented to President and Mrs. Bush at the time. So this is a reproduction of the type of chariot that the Emperor many years ago would have ridden in. And the last gift I'm going to give, one of the students talked about the Great Wall of China, and this kind of, to me, looks like a crystal ball, and it is. It's a glass ball, and inside you see depiction of the Great Wall of China, which is considered one of the great wonders of the world. And one thing I learned is that when astronauts are up in space, the only man-made structure that they can see from space is the Great Wall of China, because it's so big and so long. So I want to conclude by encouraging all of you to think about being diplomats. I noticed our next speaker, Alex Tait, wrote that when he was a young boy, he liked to go hiking with his dad, and he was fascinated with maps. When I was your age, I loved to read history books, and I was fascinated with presidents. And so we want to encourage you, no matter what your fascination is, whether it's geography or history or maybe the arts or sports, that you pursue your dreams so that then you can maybe have a job someday that you do the things that you most love to do. And for some of you, that might be traveling to other countries and learning other languages. And again, that's what diplomats do. And so it's hard sometimes to know when you're your age what you want to do or whether you would like that. But this new game that's been developed, again, by Dr. Shirley Hammond here at the Bush Library and David, who was introduced earlier from EduWeb, this new game gives you a way to do that from your home, to see what would it be like if to be a diplomat in China. So that team has developed a short little video, which we're going to show now, to give you a little taste of what this new game is. And we really do encourage you all, when you get back to your classrooms or get back home tonight, to maybe play the game on your own. So we can roll that tape.
So again, when you return to your classrooms, your teachers will have the information on how to download this from the App Store or from Google Play as well. Thanks a lot for sharing this information about that and for your presentation of the items as well. I'd like to say welcome to Alex Tait from National Geographic. Now, he has one of the best job titles ever. If you want to know who Geographic is named out of, it's this guy. He is the geographer at the National Geographic Society. We went to the top of the heap for him. He has a passion for exploring the world and understanding its physical and cultural geography. He's an expert in map making known as cartography. He has created maps of every country of the world and has helped produce atlases of history and national parks and even rock climbing locations as well. Also, he's used his mapping expertise in international boundary dispute cases before world courts. So please make welcome right now as we say hello to Alex Tait from National Geographic. Alex, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Or I should say, howdy. It's a little hard for this New Englander to get the local lingo, but there we go. I'm really honored to be here at the George Bush Presidential Library to talk with you today. And as you've seen, George Bush was a businessman and a diplomat and a politician, but you can tell by the way he engaged with the people in China and with the culture in China that he was really a geographer. He was learning about the world. And at National Geographic Society, we endeavor to teach people about the world, and especially through understanding the geography of the world. Our education program is especially focused on middle school students. So I'm really happy to be able to talk with you all today, and we're going to be talking about the geography of China. Now, I have a confession to make. I am the geographer at National Geographic Society, and I've been to a lot of countries around the world, but I've not been to China. So I was learning a lot about China and getting ready to talk with you today. I already knew some. I learned some more. I did, however, have a chance to go near to China in December, just last month. I was in Nepal for work, and I had a chance to go in the Khumbu region of Nepal, which is right near Mount Everest. And this is me on the trail with my trusty companion that I picked up along the way. And this is a view of Ama Dablam, one of the most beautiful mountains in the world. And I was able to take a picture from near Ama Dablam of Mount Everest, or as it's known in Chinese, Chomolungma. Now, I had some help from Bowen, but any mispronunciations of the Chinese place names are all mine. So Mount Everest, as you know or may not know, is on the border of China and Nepal. It's the highest mountain in the world. So I was about 10 miles away from China. Now, in telling you about the geography of China, I'm going to take the opportunity to show you a lot of things, because I think in learning geography and learning about a new place, seeing maps and photographs gives you an idea of what the place is all about. And especially for geography, where we want to know in geography, where is something, why are things located where they are, and what does it mean? Why are things important in certain areas? So to start with, where is China? Now, hopefully most of you, middle school students, recognize this. This is the United States in North America. And we're just going to do a quick move across the Pacific Ocean to China. And one thing you'll notice right away is that China is essentially at the same latitude, north-south, as the United States. It's got a very warm southern part and a very cold northern part, and it has variable weather and seasons similar to areas of the United States. Now, let's take a closer look at what's called a topographic map. This map shows elevation, so it shows very low areas in green and very high areas in darker brown. The areas of middle elevation and small hills and mountains are in yellow. Now, a map of China shows, a topographic map of China shows some very interesting characteristics. One area I'd like to point your eye to on this physical map of China is the lowland area near the Pacific coast. These are areas that are very well watered. They have a lot of water access, a lot of forests, and very different from this area, which you notice very quickly on the map. This is the high mountains and the high plateau of Tibet. These are the highest mountains in the world, many mountain ranges, and a very different part physically of China. One more area we can take a look at, there we go, are these basins and deserts in western and northern China. So these three areas are very important in understanding China's geography, both the physical geography and, when we get to it, where the people are. And you'll see those patterns. One more thing on the map that I'd like to show you are the two major rivers of China. And these are the Yellow River and the Yangtze, very important in the history of China. This is where Chinese culture originally developed and Chinese society originally developed. So moving on from the physical to the cultural, where the people are and understanding the people on the environment. And again, I always like to bring up the maps. So this is a map of population density in China. And what you can see is the dark red are where the people are the most dense, where most of the people live. And the lighter yellow areas are much more rural, far fewer people. And we see the same pattern. So the physical geography helps you understand where the people are. So there's our coastal area of low plains and fertile river valleys, lots of people. Here's the Tibetan Plateau, where all the mountains are, where Bowen was talking about, the rocky soil and very few people. Now, understanding where the people are is also about understanding where people concentrate in cities. China has 4 of the 8 largest cities in the world. Now, as some of you may know, China's population is over 1 billion. It's actually 1.4 billion. And I'd like to take you on a quick tour of some of the biggest cities and some other cities of interest in China, starting with Beijing, going to Shanghai, going to Guangzhou, and then interior, we'll take a look at Chengdu, and in the far west, a city called Urumqi. So Beijing, you might know, is, of course, the capital of China. It's a combination of long history and modern, very large buildings and new construction. Beijing is over 2,000 years old, and it has been the capital of China off and on for the last 800 years. Now, a city that was mentioned by some of our readers is Shanghai, and you can see here the Pudong district. This entire part of Shanghai was built since 1991. It's all new, very large buildings. Shanghai has 24 million people. It is larger than the largest city in the United States, New York, which has about 20 million people in the metro area. Now, Shanghai is really important, just like New York. It's one of the economic centers of China, and it's actually an economic center for the whole world. So we're moving down to southern China now, taking a look at the city of Guangzhou. It's near Hong Kong, both of which are on the Pearl River. This is one of the most densely populated areas of the world. Major industry. A lot of your computer electronics get made in this area. Your iPhone, if you have one, is probably put together in this Pearl River area near Guangzhou. So I wanted to include Chengdu in particular because it's the center for panda research and has panda breeding centers. And in the mountains just west of Chengdu are the largest preserved areas for protecting panda habitat in the wild. And of course, I couldn't not show some baby pandas. So I hope I can get your attention with those. Maybe we can go full screen with this, if that's possible. So these baby pandas are from the Atlanta Zoo. National Geographic photographer Joel Sartore, who some of you may have seen his Photo Arc series of photographs, where he's photographing all the species in captivity. He's trying to get to 10,000 different species. But he photographed these at the Atlanta Zoo, and the pandas at the Atlanta Zoo came from the Chengdu Breeding Center. One more city to show that far western China isn't just rocky soil. Urumqi is a fast-growing city in western China that is helping connect that part of China to all the rest of Central Asia and Europe. So all these cities are really important in the current economic boom in China. Now let's move on to take a look at some of the other regions of China and understanding things instead of from a city standpoint, although I'll show the cities that we just took a look at. We're going to try and look at some of the regions in China. And the first one I'd like to look at is what I'm calling the central core, but historically it was known as the Middle Kingdom. This is the area where Chinese culture first developed, and for each of the empires throughout the history of China, this has been the core area where the capitals are and where the culture has developed. So what are some of the most important cultural sites in this area? This is what is known as the Forbidden City in Beijing. And the Forbidden Palace was forbidden to outsiders during the Empire era when it was built. Of course, now people can go visit, and as the Diplomatic Dragon app notes, it is not known as the Forbidden City in Beijing, it is known as the former palace. This is a historical photograph from the National Geographic Archives of the Ming mausoleums. This is where 13 of the 16 Ming emperors are buried. And of course, we have to take a look at the terracotta warriors, which Bowen mentioned are 8,000 of them were created and buried with the first emperor of China. Now, I love the story about how this was found, and it was during the time that George Bush was in China. The story goes that workers were digging a well near the city of Xi'an in China, and you can imagine somebody digging through the dirt and hitting the head of one of these warriors. And they slowly uncovered them and realized that there was an important site, and it has become one of the most popular sites to visit in China. Last but not least, of course, is the Great Wall of China. It actually should probably be called the Great Walls of China because they don't all connect, and there's very many of them. Recent research by Chinese researchers indicates that there's over 10,000 miles of wall that have been built over 2,000 years. That would take you across the United States over 3 times. So from the central part of China, I'd like to now take us to some of the outer areas of China. And these are what are known in China as the autonomous regions. There's 5 of them, and they're sort of the inverse of the core area. And I'd like to focus in particular on Tibet, the Tibet Autonomous Region. And the Tibetan monks in this photo, they are turning prayer wheels, and you need to turn them clockwise. I was in Nepal, as I said, and my traveling companion there told me that and there's a Buddhist tradition in Nepal as well, of course, that you needed to turn them clockwise. And so every time we passed them, just like these monks are doing, you'd grab the handle on each one of them and turn them all for good luck. In Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, is this stupendous architecture from the Tibetan culture. This is the Potala Palace, and it has over 1,000 rooms. Imagine a house with 1,000 rooms. So, China today, and looking at the important themes in China from a geographic standpoint, and you can think about these in relation to your country, the United States. We want to think about international relations, and this is very appropriate for our current location. George Bush helped China and the United States in their diplomatic relations, and he helped integrate China into the world communities. And today, China is a very prominent player in the world. It's one of the most important countries in the world, and the international relations that were helped by George W. Bush are part of that. Of course, the population in China is a very important theme. China is actually reaching a point where the population growth is slowing down and will reach a maximum in the next 10 years and then level out or perhaps start to decline a little bit. And it's important to think about how to take care of all those people in a fast improving economy. And just like in the United States, with our 390 million people, you need to know how to take care of everybody. The economy in China, as I said, and as many of you may know, is booming. In 2014, by one measure of economic size, China surpassed the United States. There's a couple of different ways that economists measure the size of economies. So the United States is larger in some measures, and China is larger in others. But what's important to note is that these are the two largest economies in the world. And having good relations between the United States and China is very important for these two economic powers. Lastly, I'd like to take a look at the environment. So just as in the United States, where we have to deal with issues of protecting the environment, the air quality and the water quality, the same issues are ongoing in China as its economy has reached such an impressive size. So there's so much construction, there's a lot of energy use, so there's issues with air pollution. But China is working very hard to develop alternative energies. They're working on wind farms. It's the largest wind farm in China. And they have even pushed the solar energy as well, all towards reducing pollution in the cities. And in 2017, Beijing had better air quality than in 2016. It was a very marked improvement. So as geographers, we're looking at both the physical environment and the human environment. And we're looking towards promoting an understanding of reaching a balance between the two so that we're able to protect the environment and have a sustainable, healthy human population. So that's my quick overview of China, and I'd like to thank you very much.
We thank Mr. Tait for all that information. We're going to go to the part of the home stretch of today's program with our video conference. It's always a lot of fun to see some faces and hear from students in other parts of the country. And today, I will be the moderator for this event, so that will mean that the schools will be asking questions from their campuses. So this is the part I mentioned to you where you've got to be very quiet because it's going to be voice activated. And if they're hearing sound from here, their microphone may not work where they are, if that makes sense. So what's going to happen here is that Lori Ham-Necker, who's worked with us a number of years on this program, will be handling the connections through Connect to Texas in Fort Worth, Texas. So once again, it's an audio-activated system, so we ask that you be very quiet until the other school says hello and they establish their connection. So with that, we're going to start the Q&A section of the program here for Mr. Tait and Mr. Putnam. And we will first go to Milburn School in Milburn, New Jersey. The teacher is Mary Lou Kirk, and they will be standing by. So a quick hello to all of you at Milburn School. Are you on the line this morning?
Yes, we are.
Here's what I would like to do. I would like for the folks that are here in our auditorium, we have a full auditorium of several hundred students from here in Bryan College Station on the campus of Texas A&M. We like to say howdy when we greet students and greet anybody around here. That's what they say on campus. So on the count of 3, we're going to give you our best howdy to tell you hello. Is that okay with Milburn? All right, here we go. Let's start it. Here we go. On 1, 2, 3. Little bit of a delay. Can you hear them?
Yes.
Very nice. Very nice. Gig 'em. I know you have no clue what that means, but that's something else they do as well. All right, so for the class with the teacher, Mrs. Mary Lou Kirk, here's your first question for Alex Tait. The floor is yours in Milburn.
Hi, my name is Alice. I'm a 7th grade student at Milburn Middle School in Milburn, New Jersey. My teacher is Mrs. Fallon. My question is for Mr. Tait. It has 2 parts. Your work must take you to beautiful yet dangerous places. What is or was the most beautiful place you have ever been?
So I was able to show you a photograph of, I think, the most beautiful place that I've gotten to go while working at National Geographic, and that was to the Khumbu region of Nepal. I showed you that photograph of the mountain called Ama Dablam, which means lady's necklace, and it's a spectacular mountain. Now, I'm a mountain climber, and I wasn't able to go up onto that mountain, but someday I would really love to go back and actually climb that.
The second part of my question, where did you feel most...
Okay, the question, if I'm lip reading here, where did you feel most threatened or frightened?
So that's an interesting question. Prior to getting to National Geographic, as Tom was mentioning, I worked for international boundary dispute cases. And I worked in some remote areas, one of which was on the border of Cambodia and Thailand. And a couple of years prior to me being there, there had been some skirmishes along the border, and both sides had placed land mines in the ground in the forest. Well, we were going to do some ground truthing, which means taking very careful measurements, and our area that we needed to study was in this area that had been mined. And so I worked with the Cambodians, the Cambodian army, to do this mapping, and they would go ahead and take the mines out while we were walking through the forest. They would check for mines, and so that was a little scary, because every time you veered off the path, somebody would grab your arm and bring you right back onto it, because they didn't want you going anywhere they hadn't checked.
And I got to say that on behalf of everybody in this room, when you were asked the most beautiful place, you didn't say Bryan College Station. We're a little disappointed, I have to say. We're just I
haven't gotten out enough yet.
Just a little bitter about that right now, I have to say. All right, let's go back now to Milburn, New Jersey. There is another question that you're going to ask Mr. Tait at this time.
Hi, my name is Adam, and I was educator at Milburn. Mrs. Rodriguez is also for Mr. Tait. What are the challenges of a country as large as China?
The question was mapping and documenting a country as large as China.
Well, it's a very good question. China is very diverse, from the highest mountains in the world to coastal islands. And it has been a challenge through history mapping China in getting information about China. So to be able to make maps, you have to gather information. And there were times where it was difficult to get a lot of information. Now that has changed in modern times, both by having access to China, but also because of satellite imagery and airplanes. So through satellite imagery, we can understand a lot about an area and be able to get information to map it.
All right, and now we have a third question from Milburn.
Hi, I'm an SG Milburn Middle School. My question is also for me. What are the biggest changes you have in years? For example, pollution in urban areas with the deep areas, etc.
All right. What are the biggest changes in China over the years in regard to pollution, increase in urban areas or decreases, that type of thing?
Well, I was able to show you at the end of my talk some of the most important themes that I see and changes in China. The growth of the urban areas in the cities has been one of the biggest changes. We have 4 different cities in China, over 20 million people. These are very large cities. And small cities in China are the size of Los Angeles in the United States. So those are smaller cities in China. So that's certainly one. Pollution is a very important issue in China. The industrialization and the growth of the economy has made that air quality and water quality very important. And as I mentioned, they are addressing those issues. And just like we in the United States address them, it's a challenge.
Okay. I appreciate the questions to Mr. Tait. I will say to the folks in Milburn, one thing that will really help is you really speak up, because when you talk, that's what keeps your mic activated. It'll be easier for Mr. Putnam to hear, who will be answering the next round of our questions. So let's go back now to Milburn and ask the questions for Mr. Putnam. And remember to really speak up.
Hi, my name is Ariana, grader at Milburn Middle. My teacher is also Ms. Rodriguez. I have 2 questions from
My first question is, came across in your work, materials, and documents.
Okay, it says, was there something that you came across in your work that was dealing with the archived type materials and documents that really surprised you while you were there?
Yeah. So I've thought about this question, and I thought I'd give a more personal answer and explain again. That gives a sense of how archives work. So again, when I was your age, I started writing letters to the president or to other politicians, and indeed one of the letters that I wrote to George Bush was discovered. It was kept over all those years here at this library, and they were able to give me a copy of that, which is a pretty neat thing. In the way that Mr. Tait is the geographer for National Geographic, the National Archives has an archivist. He's the top archivist. And when he was named, his name's David Ferriero. And so we looked at the Kennedy Library when I was there, and we found a letter that he wrote when he was in high school to President Kennedy about the Peace Corps. I asked this question to Warren Finch, the director of the Bush Library, and he mentioned that one of exciting moment for him and his team here was they found a letter that they didn't know that had existed that George Bush wrote to his children on the eve of sending our country and our armed forces to war to liberate Kuwait. And it was a very personal letter, and it's now on display here at the library. And I want to give one other example. It's not from the National Archives Presidential Library System, but I heard this story that some students who were your age living in Long Island about 100 years ago went on a field trip to Teddy Roosevelt's home, where President Roosevelt, he was our president at the turn of the century, went to retire and where he died. And those students went on a field trip like you've gone on a field trip today, and they went back to their classroom and they wrote thank you notes, and they said what they learned about Teddy Roosevelt. And one student named Thomas Mayer described Teddy Roosevelt as a fulfiller of good intentions. You know, it's good to have good intentions, but it's hard often for us to act on them. And that later, a biographer just a few years ago named Edmund Morris was doing his research, and he asked to look at all the different collections at that particular home, Teddy Roosevelt's home, and they showed him these letters that those students had written. And he saw that line that Teddy Roosevelt was a fulfiller of good intentions, and he's a very, very famous biographer. He wrote 3 volumes, and he said, that is going to be the last line of my 3rd volume in my book because it beautifully sums up who Teddy Roosevelt was. So Edmund Morris came to the Kennedy Library, and we had a question and answer period just like this, and someone raised their hand and said, can you explain, how did you find that letter? And Mr. Morris explained the story I just told you, that when he read that letter written by someone your age, he thought, that's how I'm going to end my book. And the man who asked the question said, well, the reason why I wanted to ask, because that young boy was my father. And so what it showed is it's this nice connection that archives can make for all of us to our history. And you should know that if you write a letter now to the president or to your senator, that you'll not only get a response, but that letter will be kept. It's part of the historical record. It's part of the history of our country.
And the lesson for all adults and for those of you that are right now, if you make promises to do something good, follow up. Yeah. All right, second question and the final one now from Milburn. It's your turn one last time here for Mr. Putnam.
My second question is, how has management materials changed with the increase in technology?
Okay, how has managing and storing archived materials changed with the increase of technology? Right question.
So the biggest thing is most of the documents here and at the Kennedy Library, again, I was the director of the Kennedy Library, that's why I keep referencing it, they were paper records. They were memos and speeches. And so what both libraries are doing is digitizing those materials or the photographs, taking scans of them or photos, and then putting them online. So you don't have to travel here to College Station or to Boston, but anyone can have access throughout the globe to those materials. The other change is now the newer libraries. So the George W. Bush Library in Dallas, Texas, or the Barack Obama Library, all of his materials are in Chicago. Most of those materials, I mean, there are some paper, because he would have read a speech, and he might have edited it, but most of those, as you all know, are on computers, or texts, or emails. And now we have a new challenge with a president that likes to tweet and use Twitter. And so it's important to keep to keep that history, to find new means for us to store those materials so future generations can always have access to them.
All right, lesson is what you put on Twitter will stay forever. So just remember that. All right, hey, a round of applause for our friends in Melbourne at New Jersey. Very nicely done. Thank you for joining us. All right, let's shift gears now. We're going to the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, where Sam Rubin is the education specialist there at the Kennedy Library. He's invited some students to join us for today's program. And again, we ask that you remain silent so that we can hear what they're saying on that end. We'd like to say hello to the folks that have been gathered there at Hobomok School of Pembroke, Massachusetts. The teacher is Paul McDonald, and there they are right there. And just as we did for our friends in Melbourne, we're going to give you a big Texas howdy from the campus of Texas A&M. And all you have to do, Hobomok, is to raise your hand if you hear them. So here we go on the count of three. Let's bring them back. Do we have them back on the line here somewhere?
They're here.
Oh, there they are. Okay. On 1, 2, 3. Little bit of a delay. Did you get? There you go. All right, very nice. All right, so all the way from Massachusetts. It's kind of a cool thing no matter what here. Welcome to our town of Bryan College Station and the campus of Texas A&M, the teacher Paul McDonald. And right now we'd like for you to ask your first question to Mr. Tait. So whoever needs to get right up into the microphone, just make your way up, and it is your turn to speak to Mr. Tait. Go right ahead.
Hi, my name is Rowan. What are the extended purposes of tea in China? Is it cultural, medicinal, for thirst, or something else?
Okay, what's the purpose of tea in China? It's real big there.
Well, I love it when the question gives me help in answering it. It is all three of those and then some more. So it's very important culturally. Okay. It has over a 3,000-year history in China. And it is used in ceremonies. It is a way of cementing relationships. It's also been used medicinally. Tea has been used medicinally. And, of course, if you're thirsty, tea is good. But the most interesting story in doing a little bit of reading about tea was that monks used the tea to help study. And so they used the caffeine in the tea to be able to stay alert and awake.
Very nice. Will it cure the flu?
You can try.
It's anything these days, right? All right, second question now from Mr. Tait.
My name's Olivia, and what makes China so different from other cultures, and why can China sustain traditions for thousands of years when other cultures cannot?
That is a very good question. That's a difficult question to answer, and I think there's a lot of ways to answer it, and it's an important question because China has maintained 4,000-year history and survived invasions and other different changes. And I think it has a lot to do with a very strong tradition of learning and institutions and the arts. And that core area of China has been able to maintain that through the centuries.
All right, let's go to our third question now from Massachusetts, from Mr. Tait.
Hello, my name is Haley. My question is, why are dragons so important to Chinese culture?
Why are dragons so important to Chinese culture?
Well, I really like this question. I was able to actually find out just today in doing a little research that I was born in the year of the dragon. And so I have a particular affinity to dragons now. And in looking into this, I found out that dragons in China are very auspicious. They are known for wisdom and strength. In Western culture, dragons are sort of fearsome and people are afraid of them, but not in Chinese culture. It's a very good symbol, and the emperors of China were descended from dragons, or so the history goes.
Is it better to be born in the year of the dragon than the year of the rat?
Well, I think so.
Okay, all right, very good. All right, now we're going to go back to Massachusetts. Let's ask our first question for Mr. Putnam.
Hi, I'm Claire. How did ping pong or table tennis evolve as one of China's most popular sports?
So this is a great question about sports, but it's in some ways a question about politics, and we really haven't been able to talk too much about the political history of China. And I don't have time to do that now either, except a name I don't think that's been mentioned yet is Mao Zedong. So he was a pivotal 20th century leader. He was still alive when George Bush was in China, but he wasn't the leader of the country at the time. He was a figurehead, and you actually saw his picture when they showed the Forbidden City. But he was controversial in some ways, a fascinating figure, and again, if you want to understand more about modern China, you have to understand him and the changes that he and his comrades brought to China. But one was he was the one who decided that ping pong should become China's national sport. And the reason, there were many, but one, it's a very easy sport to play. You don't need a lot of space. You don't need a lot of equipment. China has so many people. Another reason is anyone can play ping pong. So, if you're basketball, you're helped if you're tall. If you're a weightlifter, you're helped if you are very muscular. If you're a gymnast or a swimmer, often you're skinnier. But anyone can play ping pong and do it well. And millions and millions of people play ping pong, and children learn from a very, very young age. And now the Chinese, because it's their national sport, have, they truly dominate. So in the last Olympics, they've won all of the gold medals. As a matter of fact, they've won 28 of the 32 gold medals since the sport was introduced in the Olympics in 1988. But one last thing, which Mao Zedong talked about when he promoted ping pong, was he actually didn't want it, when individuals played it with their friends and family, to be all that competitive. He wanted a kind of in the spirit of Chinese culture for it to be a social time, a time of sharing and kind of a fun activity for people to get together and enjoy that game. So the credit for why ping pong is so important goes to Mao Zedong.
Yeah, interesting. Anybody here played ping pong before? Yeah, it's kind of popular here as well. All right, let's go back now for another question, the second to Mr. Putnam.
Hi, my name is Ryan. Are you able to talk about the history of the Forbidden City?
The Forbidden City.
Right. So, again, we've seen pictures of the Forbidden City. It's in Beijing. It was where the emperors lived. 24 different emperors lived in that city. It's a collection of palaces. And those emperors lived there over the course of 500 years. Again, it was a place to protect the emperor, so it was somewhat of a fortress. Mr. Tait mentioned the various invasions, so it was a means to kind of protect, the supreme leaders of China. And now, again, if you go, it's not called the Forbidden City, but it's called the Former Palace, and essentially it's a museum. So people go now to visit this beautiful museum and to understand the history of China. And one thing that's not surprising, but that is when George and Barbara Bush were diplomats in China, their primary role was to represent the United States and American culture and to create friendships there in China. But another role was to greet and bring visitors, American visitors, to China so that we could learn, individuals from the United States. So the most important visitor who came when they were there was the president of the time, President Gerald Ford, and his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. He was the second president to visit after Richard Nixon. But they also had their family come over, and they had friends. There's a funny story about President Bush's mother was always a good sport. She was an older woman, and she rode her bike around with George Bush, and the Chinese were just amazed that this older woman was riding her bike with her son through the streets of China. But the place that Barbara Bush, Mrs. Bush, most liked to bring her visitors was the Forbidden City. So anyone who came to visit, she would make sure that she arranged for a special tour that she would escort them on to see the Forbidden City when they were there.
All right. A special thanks to our friends at Hobomock School of Pembroke, Massachusetts, and at the Kennedy Library there. Their teacher is Paul McDonald. We thank you for your support and for being part of today's program. Your participation is greatly appreciated. And let's give a round of applause to our friends at the Kennedy Library. Well, that concludes the first half of our program today. No, I'm kidding. It's on the downhill slide. Yeah. Special thanks for contributions to today's program go out to the geographer Alex Tait of National Geographic Society, Tom Putnam from the Presidential Library System of the National Archives and Records Administration, student readers from Cypress Grove Intermediate of College Station ISD and from Jane Long Intermediate of Bryan ISD, Texas A&M University Chinese School, the distance learning specialists, students, teachers, and administrators for joining us today. One personal note, I know that the older you get, I just hope you don't take for granted these moments. I know that you're probably a little young to realize what a big deal this is, but not every student in a lot of school districts ever gets to visit a presidential library, much less be specially invited to be part of a program that was put together just by you, just for you, actually. And hopefully you'll remember this the rest of your life, that you shared this time at the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum, and also that you will make reading one of your greatest hobbies, and Mrs. Bush would be most happy with that. Reading does provide you with a lot of discovery adventures. Be sure you download the app. Enjoy China Diplomat Dragon. That's an action-paced game while learning about relationships and diplomacy. Have fun reading and join us again next year. And again, on behalf of the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum, it's been an honor to have you here today. Thank you very much for being part of today's program. Be safe headed back to your schools. Thank you.